I want to start out with a phrase we hear a lot of these days, and that is signal to noise or signal to noise ratio. Podcasters use it, business leaders use it, productivity people love it. And there's a reason that it's everywhere because it's one of those phrases that really describes what it's trying to. It describes something we're all living through. And that's this overwhelming flood of information, opinions, alerts, commentary. It never stops. Now, most of the conversation is about the problem. There's too much noise and there's not enough signal. How do we cope? How do we make it? How do we filter? I speak about this subject an awful lot, and anyone who's involved in health or wellness has to address this subject because it's so intertwined with health and wellness and with modern life and what we're trying to accomplish. In fact, I recently wrote an article asking a different question. And the question was, what if we could actually get to an all signal world? What would that look like? And I started thinking about people throughout history who might have been able to do it, the people who got closest to it. So just for fun, today I'm also going to give you my top 5 highest signal people in history at no extra charge. And we're going to look at what made them that way. We're going to notice patterns that connect all of them. And then because this is a weight loss show, we're going to bring it all the way home to your life and your health. So let's start with where the term comes from. Signal to noise ratio is essentially an engineering term. It's born in the world of radio transmission and early electronics, and engineers were trying to send a signal, a clear signal, across a wire or through the air without it getting corrupted by background interference. Think about old vinyl records, for those of you who are old enough to remember them. All that crackling and hissing underneath the music, that's noise. The music is the signal. And better equipment meant a higher signal to noise ratio, clearer sound. And on a personal note, even though today's music is clearer, somehow it sounded better back then. And a bunch of you know what I'm talking about. But at some point, someone realized this was the perfect metaphor for human attention and decision making. Signal is the information, and it's the action that matters. Noise is everything else. The distraction, the drama, the overthinking, the irrelevant stuff. And now the metaphor is everywhere because we're all living in this historically low signal, high noise environment. And the people who figure out how to flip that ratio, they're the ones that tend to do remarkable things. And that brings us to our list, right? Because I started thinking about, like, who was able to do this? Who had a really high signal to noise ratio? As a matter of fact, on my feed the other day, on my Facebook feed, I saw a video with Kevin O'Leary. You may know him as Mr. Wonderful, right? The guy from Shark Tank. And he was talking about Steve Jobs. He used to work for Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs was really cruel to him. You know, he would tell him to shut the F up. If Mr. Wonderful would bring up something that was not ideal, and they would have a little back and forth. And Jobs would say to him, "Are you making money?" And Mr. Wonderful would say, "Yeah, I'm making a ton of money." And he'd say, "Then shut up." But Kevin O'Leary really admired him, and he admired him because he said he was 80% signal. And he said he never met anyone who had a greater signal to noise ratio until he met Elon Musk, who he believes was 100% signal. Now, nobody operates at 100% anything, but consider what Musk has actually built. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX. He's worked in the federal government. And whether you agree with his politics or not, that level of output requires something extraordinary in terms of focus. And the interesting thing for me is where he lives. Because although he's a gazillionaire and he has a big ranch in Texas, he doesn't really live there. He lives at Starbase, which is the SpaceX facility he built essentially from scratch. It's on the Gulf Coast. And don't forget what SpaceX is. This is him, wanting to go to the moon or Mars or wherever he's trying to go. And on the grounds, there's a home that costs about $50,000. That's where he lives. Just so he could be close to work. Because commuting for him would be noise. So he's on our list. He comes in at number 4. Now, at number 5 was Winston Churchill. He was dealing with a very different kind of signal, not the isolation of some of these other guys. In 1940, Europe had fallen. France was taken over by the Nazis. Britain was alone. And almost everyone around him was pointing towards negotiation. They were saying, you got to find some kind of accommodation with Hitler. But he knew something. He read the signal very clearly when almost nobody else would. What he understood was that Hitler would not stop. Negotiation would not have worked. It would not have been a path to peace. It was a path to eventual defeat. And he kept that truth in mind. And that's why he was such an effective leader, for having that high signal under fire. At number 3, we have Mr. Jobs. We mentioned him already, so we're not going to talk any more about him. But obviously, we know what he accomplished. He changed the world. Whether it was for the better or not, that we can debate. But he definitely changed the world. Coming in at number 2, Albert Einstein. Now, Einstein had to engineer his environment, essentially. There's a famous story that Einstein wore essentially the same suit every day. Why did he do this? Because he decided that clothing decisions were noise. He had so many important things going on in his head. He didn't want to deal with that. It was taking up attention, energy, mental bandwidth. He needed that for physics. And that's not him being eccentric. That's intentional, management of the noise. He essentially looked at his life and he said, what is my signal and what is my noise? And he got rid of all the noise. And that's pretty cool. Now, number 1 is a guy, maybe the one guy, that was even smarter than Einstein. And that's Isaac Newton. He's the gold standard. He's the benchmark against which everyone else gets measured. In the 1600s at Cambridge University, it closed. And guess why? It's a reason we can relate to. There was a plague. So Newton was a kid. He went home to his family farm, and there were no colleagues, no classes, no obligations, just a young man who was isolated for about 18 months. And in that period, he invented calculus. He formulated the laws of motion and gravity, and he did foundational work in optics. In other words, he basically created 3 fields. And these are some of the largest and most fantastic intellectual achievements in history. And he did it in 18 months. He later called it his year of wonders. And it was all due to the absence of interference. It was pure signal. This guy had the ability to block out everything else. Now, honorable mention, just as an homage to baseball, which is starting again in a couple of days, I want to give a shout out to Rogers Hornsby. Now, you may not expect him on a list like this. You may not know who he is. But Rogers Hornsby is considered the greatest right-handed batter in baseball history. And he wouldn't go to the movies. He wouldn't read. Reportedly, he wouldn't even look out a train window at passing scenery, all because he wanted to protect his eyes for hitting. That's almost absurd, but it's a perfect illustration of the principle. He knew what the signal was. He knew what threatened it. And he built a wall around it with almost no exceptions. And in fact, nobody could stand the guy. He was so obsessive. He was so focused that they all couldn't stand him. And that's been true of other great baseball players, and that's true of some of the men on this list, isn't it? It's a really interesting thing. Other people's feelings tend to be noise also. And these guys, they could be very abrasive because they didn't care about that. They were just so about signal. And before we bring this home to your health, I want to name something that, pulls this all together, what they all have in common. A number of these people, Newton, Einstein, Jobs, Musk, are said to have been on the autism spectrum, or to have had traits that would strongly suggest that they were autistic. Musk has actually said so publicly, and there's pretty much no doubt that Newton was. And it's tempting to think, well, that explains it. The spectrum gives you focus, but that's not quite right. Because for every Newton on the spectrum, there are countless people with the same neurological wiring who got completely swallowed up by the noise, the sensory overwhelm, the social confusion and anxiety. For many people, it's not an asset, it's actually paralyzing. So the spectrum isn't the key. It's not the important variable. It's an amplifier. It amplifies whatever direction you're actually going. The right environment, the right obsession, the right structure, and the intensity becomes extraordinary. With the wrong conditions, with the same wiring, becomes a liability. The inability to shut out that noise becomes a liability. So you see, even though there might be the great ability to focus, it's a two-pronged kind of thing. And what I mean by that is to focus on what you're interested in if all conditions are good. So you see, the real variable for everyone, spectrum or not, is the ability to do that and to create a structure that helps you do that. Newton had his isolation. Einstein had his suit and his thought experiments. Musk built a compound around his work. Jobs had an entire company organized to protect his attention. They managed their environment, in other words. I mean, again, Hornsby wouldn't look out the damn window. So some of them had wiring that helped them build that structure instinctively, but most of us have to do it consciously. But the idea is the same. You see, the conditions that you create that helps you to focus on the signal, that helps you to minimize and block out the noise, that's the key. And the irony is that the more noise there is, the more difficult that is to do. That's kind of the the catch-22. That's the conflict. But it becomes even more necessary in that case. Now, what does any of this have to do with us? With losing weight? which I always have to pull it back to, right? Just based on the commitment. I don't always. I mean, because we talk about health, we talk about, kind of managing in this world. But it has everything to do with losing weight. Because the reason that most people struggle with their health, it's not a lack of information. Even if you don't know exactly what to eat, you know that a salad is better than a pepperoni pizza, right? You know that whole foods is better for you than highly processed foods. If you don't know that, let's have a conversation. Because at minimum, I feel like everyone knows that much. Now, some people say that none of that matters because every week there's a new study and every month there's a new approach and every year there's a new celebrity diet and a new drug, and that's not information necessarily. It's noise. It comes to you as information. But all too often it functions as noise, as internal noise, or rather external noise. But then there's the internal noise. The self-criticism after you have a bad meal. The scale obsession. I've got people who are so afraid of the scale. And I understand why. But that's also a type of noise. The emotional spiral when the numbers go up. The waste of that time and energy and attention and signal. The bargaining, right? I'll start Monday. The comparing yourself to other people or results you got in the past. The catastrophizing when you're not at a pace that you think you should be at. As if any of us even know where that is. So none of that is moving you forward. All of it is obscuring the signal. Does that make sense? So what is the signal when it comes to weight loss? I mean, if we had to boil it down, if we had to make it simple, what could we say? Well, are you eating real food? Are you eating when you're genuinely hungry? Or are you eating for some other reason? Out of habit, out of boredom? To lift your mood up? Are you stopping when you're full? Are you moving your body? Are you sleeping? Are you managing stress? Do you have a strategy to do so? So those things are the signal. Now, I don't want to minimize this, right? I don't want to make light of it because there are circumstances that make it so much more difficult. There are people, a lot of people, as a matter of fact, whose metabolisms are so messed up that they have difficulties with this. Because when your metabolism's messed up, you're going to get the wrong signals, and I'm using that in a bit of a different context, right? The wrong physiological signals from your body. You're going to get signals that tell you you're hungry when maybe you're not. You're going to get craving signals. You're going to get, signals that don't allow your body to know when it's full, right? And they call that noise. They call that food noise. It's a real thing. I'm not minimizing it. And that's one of the reasons I exist. Because the programs that I offer rehabilitate the metabolism. That's the function of them. That's what we're trying to do. So by all means, I'm not saying that you should not address your physiology. You absolutely should. You should try to tilt the game surface to your favor when it's all against you. But as far as what the actual signal is, as far as what it comes down to for health and weight loss, it's really that simple. Are you eating real food? Are you eating when you're genuinely hungry and stopping when you're full? Are you moving your body? Are you sleeping? Are you managing stress? Getting outside also and breathing is helpful. So Hornsby knew that his signal was his eyesight and his swing, and that's all that mattered to him. He blocked out the rest. He built a wall around it. Well, what's your signal, and what are you allowing in that's threatening it? That's obscuring your hearing of it. You know, I want to say one other thing that I think is really important. We talk a lot about motivation. We talk about psychology. And for everything that exists in the mental and emotional world, there is a physical, real world corollary. Am I using that word right? Is it corollary or correlate? I'll look that up. But here's what I mean. In the body is made up of cells, right? Now, the most important thing for a cell is the cell membrane. It's like the filter, right? It says, this is okay to come in, this is okay to leave. If there's no filter, if there's not a good, strong cell membrane that can properly distinguish between what's right and what's not right, between signal and noise, then there's no cell. The membrane keeps coherence. Does that make sense? The membrane is structure. It allows, or it knows what to allow to come in and what to keep out. You see, for everything, again, in the emotional and psychological world, there's something in the physical, actual world that says the same thing. In other words, these are laws of the universe. If we respect the laws, we have a much better chance to succeed, as opposed to if we ignore these laws, right? Now, to close, Newton changed civilization in 18 months of silence. Einstein wore the same suit so he could think about the universe and he could change the world. Musk sleeps in a box next to his office, next to his rockets. And we spoke about Hornsby, right? But these aren't quirks. This is the same principle expressed in different ways. Know your signal, protect it, build a structure around it, and stop spending yourself on the noise. Don't give it attention. And it can be so hard not to. And you don't need to be a genius. You don't need special wiring. You need to make a decision about what matters and defend it. Right? Just like the cell walls that we're talking about, the membrane protects the cell. The signal is always going to be there, just as the noise will always be there to you. The signal, in fact, is there the whole time. If you tune in, you know what's right. That's the signal. And it's been waiting for you to simply turn down the noise so you can hear it. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. I will be with you again next week. Have a great day.